The next library that I want to talk to you about is Bitters. Bitters provides styles and variables and structure for Bourbon-based projects. If you visit the Bitters website, it'll give you a bunch of information as to what Bitters allows you to do. And actually right here in this animated section, it tells you how these sorts of things will be formatted using Bitters. And there's some information that tells you how lightweight it is, how you can alter it and change it. You're not required to use anything that's there, and how easy it is to install. This also lists some of the features of Bitters, so it uses SASS structure, it uses variables, but note that it does separate out the formatting for Bitters from Neat. So Neat is considered a separate component, and then you can layer Bitters on top of that. It also has typography that is specified. It'll allow you to remove default styling from lists, and it's going to style form elements as well. Here's the install instructions. So you're just going to gem install Bitters, and then you're going to cd into your SASS directory. You're going to use Bitters install, and that's going to create a Bitters folder that has the files that you'll need, and then you'll need to import the Bitters file into your project. So with that said, let's go ahead and use this on our project. The page that I'm working on is just a really basic page, and it has just some basic HTML formatting, and we're going to use Bitters to style this page. So I'm going to start off by installing Bitters. I'll go into terminal, and I'm already pointing in the directory that I want to work from, so I'm going to do a sudo gem install Bitters. And the next thing I need to do is I need to install Bitters. So I'll use Bitters install to install this into my directory. And if we look in the folder that I'm working from, when I install Bitters, you can see that I get a new folder called base, and this is going to contain the Bitters based elements. If we look in the base folder, you can see that there's quite a few files here. So there's something called base.sassy.css, and then there's a bunch of other ones, and I'll show you these in brackets in just a moment. I'm going to take this directory and I'm going to move it into my SASS folder. Now I already have a base folder here which has all of my base styles, so I'm going to move this base folder in here, since this also contains base styles. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the base.sass, which was the partial that I was using before, and I'm just going to remove everything that was styling my page before. But before we do that, let's actually make sure that SASS is watching the directory. So I'm going to tell SASS to watch, and I want to go into the SASS folder. I'm going to be using something called main.sass, and I want this to compile to my CSS folder and create a file called main.css. All right, now SASS is watching, and as you can see, my page currently looks like this, and this is because I have some previous styles that I've already created. Those, as I mentioned, are in my base.sass file, so I'm just going to get rid of all of these styles. We don't need those anymore. And in the base.dir, I'm going to tell this to import in the base file from the base folder. So this is going to go ahead and get the files from Bitters. And let's actually load that first, and then I'll load my base file here, which currently is actually empty. We're not going to really use that, but we'll load the Bitters file first. All right, I'm going to save, and if we look at our file in the browser, you can now see that my page is much more plain. So it has actually removed all of the formatting. And actually, really quickly, let me just get rid of the link to Bitters for a second, just so I can show you what the page looks like without Bitters. This is what the page looks like without any formatting. You can see that nothing is being styled. My headlines are not bold and they are not different sizes, and that's because I have a reset that I've already installed, and that's in my global folder. So I have a reset file that I'm using that's just setting the font size of everything to 16 pixels or 100% and removing all margin and padding. It is worth noting that Bitters does not come with a reset, so if you do want to incorporate something like that, you're going to have to add it. I like to use a reset, so I will include that. But with bitters, you can see that I have some basic formatting that's being attached to all of these elements. Now, all of my content is going right to the edge of the page, and that's because I don't have any spacing. Remember that bitters does not incorporate any sort of grid system. I do have neat in my project, and that's located in my plugins directory. So I'm actually already calling neat. I'm just not using it yet. So if we look at the index page, you can see that I have a section tag with a class of container that wraps around everything on my page. So down here at the bottom, that closes right before the footer. And then I have a div that's right inside it with a class of wrapper. So I'm going to go into my base file, and we'll just use this to add the SASS that we're going to be using in this project. And I'm just going to specify that I want the container to use the grid container, and I want the wrapper to include a grid column of 12. So this is going to make a full width, but if we save and we refresh, you can now see that I get a little bit of indentation. And let me just show you some of the bitters files. If we look in our 2-base folder, here's the base file that was generated from bitters. So their Sassy base file is just importing in all of these elements. And if we look, there's a variables file right here. So the variable file just is going to specify some things about typography, about line height, different sizing. It does come with some default colors. You can change any of these things if you want. So if I didn't want to use their shade of blue and I wanted to change this to a slightly lighter shade of blue, all I have to do is change the hex value, and now it's going to change throughout. And you can add to these. This is just a starting point. You can use this as a beginning point for your projects and add and remove as you see fit. The next file is the buttons, and this has formatting that's going to specify towards buttons. We have a form file, which is going to style all of the form elements on our page. Layout is pretty minimal here, so if I wanted to change layout settings, I should probably do it in here. We have a lists file, which is just removing the bullets on our lists and removing padding and margin. We have a media, which is styling any images, pictures, and figures that might be part of our project. We have a tables file, which is going to style our tables. And we have a typography style, which is going to set typography-based settings. So any of these things that I want to add to and or modify, this is a great place for me to do so. So for instance, if I want my H1 to have a font size of 2.8 ems, and I want my H2 to have a font size of 2.4 ems, all I have to do is make those declarations. And if we save and we go back out to the browser and refresh, you can see that I'm getting an error, and that's because I wrote my declarations in bitters file. And bitters, you might have noticed, but I didn't implicitly point it out to you, bitters is using Sassy CSS. So the format that I'm writing here is our SASS. So I will write my declarations in my base partial just so I can continue to use SASS. You could modify their files, but you would have to use Sassy CSS, or you could change all of the files to a SASS file, and that's what I've actually done in other projects. I prefer to use SASS personally instead of Sassy CSS. Either one is going to work, and they even work in conjunction with each other. In this project, I'm using SASS files and Sassy CSS files. You just can't mix them within each other. So if I'm using a Sassy CSS file, I have to use the Sassy CSS formatting, which is going to include our curly braces and our semicolons. If I'm going to use a SASS-based file, I don't need those things. But if I save my changes here in my base.sass file and refresh, you can see that now the H1s and the H2s are going to be formatted accordingly. So I think that you'll find that bitters can be very helpful as a starting point. It just gives you something to begin with on a project. It's pretty simple and lightweight. And as we've discussed with any of the Bourbon related elements, this is just a starting point. It's a place for you to take these files and modify them for your personal projects. So add, remove, Do whatever you need to do to make it work for your project.